Hey Dan, how's it going?
Hi.
All right, so I think people will probably roll in. As they do, maybe what we can do is just put in the chat just maybe where you're calling from and if you've worked at all with MCP or even with like tool use or anything like that. I can start. And in the meantime, I'll share my screen and we can just dive in. Nice, New York. Hey Damien.
What's up, Dylan? How you doing, man?
Yeah, pretty good. How are you?
I am doing well. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah, awesome. I think we'll jump in. So, a brief intro. I'm Dylan. I'm one of the two founders here at Worldwide Studios. We've been running these community sessions. Basically, every week we try to pick a new thing that some things sometimes we work with, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just go in blind and try to spend just a little bit of time learning it, and then we'll do a demo session, kind of saying what we've learned. In this case, for this week, I built a simple MCP server to work with Claude. Really, it works with anything, but in this case, I found Claude is the easiest way of actually testing these things because even Cursor was kind of a pain. So what I'll do is I'll show off kind of the code I wrote, how you actually run the thing, demonstrate using it, and then Claude Anthropic, I guess, provides a few that they've built. Some of them are built into Claude, like they have really good Google integrations now, but they also have one for the file system. So I'll kind of demonstrate using one that's pre-built along with how I built one. So I'll dive in. I have Claude here. This is their desktop. I think you can for this case, I'm going to do on the desktop. If you actually deploy your server, you can use their web app, I believe. I'm normally a Chat GPT guy, but they don't really have great MCP support yet, so I'm having to use Claude to demo this. So just to start out, it's pretty. This is in Python. I think I started building in Python because when I was searching around, when I was asking the chatbots, they recommended Python. When I actually dove into the tutorials as I hit hangups, almost all of them were in TypeScript. So maybe it's better to actually use TypeScript to build these things. But generally, it looks pretty much just like an API. In this case, it's not an API, but it looks like one. You kind of have your routes or tools, and they do various things. So for here, I did one, like let's do a simple greeting. They're like the Claude tutorial does a weather tool, and then I also did like an add tool, an exponent tool, just as I was testing and getting to know things. Pretty simple Python. Something like this you can kind of generate. This is Cursor, so you could just generate this. I did that, and then I ran into problems with this. You could see where like tried to host it, but then this actual MCP run doesn't support like a server like that. It only does this standard I/O, at least from what I could tell. But once you have that, it's really, really simple. They have some built-in tools, so I could do just to test it. I can run like a MCP inspector, which is really, really nice to actually test things. So when I come up, I can connect, list. Sometimes it'll have errors, but I think I can do initialize. Is this out? Let's see what this, yeah, template. That template maps directly to here, my get greeting. And then let's see, I can test it, enter a name, Dylan Holland. Yeah, and then get back. That's a little weird, but it works perfectly. Moving on to the tools, I can actually test list the tools. You see that maps directly as well. I have get weather, add an exponent, and I can just test. And I will test weather. So Paris, France. Yeah. So confirming that they work, I can actually move over to Claude itself. They should already be set up here. You can confirm that by in two ways. One here, you see this is add exponent get weather. You actually add these in settings developer, and then you can see my tools. Really, when you go to edit it, you edit the configuration, and it looks pretty similar. Both here, pretty simple JSON, and it's the same. See, I have to pass in API key. If you pass environment variables, arguments, the command file system. This is one that they provided, so it's just npx to install it and run it. But once that's set up, it works really nicely here in Claude. So I could say weather in Marion, Indiana. Yeah. See, it's running a tool, gets it back. Really nice. So the result, the exponent, 25 to the 500. Yeah.
So sorry if I may be not as knowledgeable as other people about MCP, but MCP is really just it's a way of connecting natural language to like an API. Is that essentially what it does?
Kind of, yeah. Have you done any work with it? Because like there's agent frameworks where you can do like tool use, and in that case you can actually provide it an API, like an API endpoint along with a description of the tool, and then it just like when in conversation it meets the description of that tool, then the model will say, okay, let's call the API because we don't know, so we delegate. So have you done anything like that, or are you going totally blind?
I'm blind at this
Okay,
time.
okay. Then in that case, basically, yes. So tool use was the old way of doing it where it was all API driven. With MCP, it doesn't like this is an API in that it's like a series of tools I can call, but it's not actually running on a server. It's not an HTTP server right now. This is running purely through like standard input output because
Right.
it's all running locally. But yes, you can also do it like you can spin up a server where it does very similar, and then MCP also works to do like web requests like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. And then to kind of demonstrate how this isn't an API, the I can show the file. The other MCP I've added here is for working with the file system. Since it's on my desktop, I can do some things locally. It's kind of limited. I can show that here. Like it's limited to any directories you pass in here for security reasons. So in this case, it's desktop and downloads, but I should have like I can copy this file server to my desktop, and then I can tell it like, okay. Can you analyze the server.py file on my desktop? Yeah, check directories. And then so the other tools I've already ran, when you run one for the first time, it'll ask if you want to always or only allow it to run once. I'll just go with always. Yeah, Python server file, implementing an MCP, server creates a set of tools, yes, dependencies. So yeah, pretty good analysis. But then because it works with my local file system, it has a bunch of built-in tools. I could probably show them all, but yes, it has write, it has edit and stuff. But just to show write, I could say, can you write this analysis to another file on my desktop called server analysis.txt? I'll allow always. Okay. See if it's actually there. See, server analysis.txt. Nice. Serve. See what it looks like. Yeah, nice. And so there's like, I guess that's general behavior just for my local file system and calling an API, but there's a bunch of them. Slowly but surely, there's more and more. So even built into Claude, I have ones for like Drive search, Gmail search, calendar search. I don't know. Haven't actually been to this marketplace, but see how quickly it loads.
Dylan, I see you're using Cascade. Do you find that more helpful than Cursor?
That's actually windsurf. That's actually windsurf.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
maybe so. I still use Cursor as my main driver. I've had better luck generating code with windsurf though. But in my consulting and freelance stuff, I generally work with pretty big code bases. So if I'm like writing code, I use Cursor for that. But I've had a lot better luck with like agent mode generating from scratch with windsurf.
All right. Very helpful.
Yeah. That's taking forever. Let's see if we can just pull it up. Let's see. Servers. Yeah. So if you come here, you see there's a ton for everything. Let's just try, I don't know, like maybe Google, Drive, web search, Slack, maybe Zapier. So I don't know if this is actually by Claude, but I know just when I was looking at Claude themselves, they had like two pretty nicely built out ones for Slack, I think GitHub. So there's like starting to be a marketplace where there's MCP for everything, and then they're also pretty easy to roll yourself. So I can open it up for questions. I've worked on this a little bit, so if there's any questions or if it's about MCP or even if it's about just general dev or anything like that.
What's your preferred method on using MCP as agent tooling?
Maybe you can say a little bit more what you mean in that regard, or
So like let's say you're using LangGraph or LangChain for building agentic systems. What is your preferred method for integrating like MCPs into the overall architecture?
yeah. So for I don't know for using, I haven't used it with LangChain. With LangChain, I've done a lot more traditional just tool calling. It seems like MCP is a replacement for that though, because like instead of having to define in your lang chain, like every time you want to build something, you have to define the tools, you have to give them a description and like how to get the variables from the context. MCP pushes all that to the MCP server. So the server itself actually, like when LangChain connects to it, their server sends back, we have these tools, here's their use cases. And so a lot of that manual work of defining the tools is no longer needed. Does that answer your question?
What do you say to define the tools if you're giving the agent freedom to make decisions on which tools to use?
Um, Can you say that again? I didn't hear the first part of that.
So if you built, um, let's say, a weather analysis agent,
Hmm.
right? And it's like it's not just giving you the weather of like today's 70 degrees, but more so like giving you like past forecasts and how they've like
Hmm.
uh, how they've sort of correlated with existing weather patterns and all that sort of in-depth analytical work.
Yeah.
You want to give them, let's say, 4 to 5 uh, tools and I don't mean tools in the sense of like agent tools specifically, but just like any sort of resources that they can pull information from in
Yeah.
order to run their analysis. Now, they may not need all 4 or 5 in every specific request. So they're going to decide on which of the 4 or 5 they're going to use at any single request,
Yes.
right? So wouldn't you still have to define the MCP,
Hmm.
give it a definition, and make sure the agent knows exactly what it is so that it understands when to use it?
Yes, you do, but the difference is instead of you doing that in LangChain as you build out the agent, you do that in the MCP server. So if I come over here, you see I'm still kind of doing that. Let's see. I'm still kind of doing that here in the doc string. Like get the exponent of a number, get the weather for a location, add two numbers. So between like the name of the function and the doc string, I don't know what the equivalent is in TypeScript, but in Python you use the doc string and the name, and it infers it from that, which maybe I don't know, maybe is one of the problems with MCP. Like I think I had trouble running this add function because like maybe what you're getting at is the model is determining when to run it, and sometimes it might decide that it not to, and there's not really much you can do. in that case. Like I think when doing LangChain with tool use, a lot of the times it's like um, I don't know, it would do the tool every time. And it's almost like restricted to using those tools where here, like there's especially when trying to do it with cursor, there was a bunch of times where I would ask it and it was like, no, I don't want to call that tool. So I think that's probably one of the early stage limits of MCP. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I was running into similar issues, so I thought you would have
Yeah.
uncovered something different.
Yeah. No, no, I think that's still kind of an issue. I don't think it's too bad. I mean, with Claude itself, at least, I haven't really hit too much of that. With Cursor, I was hitting that quite a bit. So I think it just depends on the model you're using and how good support is currently. I think because it's a Claude thing, it's an Anthropic thing they're pushing really hard. They probably have the best support at this time.
Makes sense.
All right, any other questions?
Can you talk just a little bit about the complexity or the level of effort to stand up an MCP server and configure it upfront? Because it seems like MCP has mo more upfront integrations and challenges. Once it's set up, then it's easier to use, but the upfront setup's a lot harder than, working with APIs.
Yeah, I From from what I've built, that's not necessarily the case. Like it's a little bit harder, but only because it's two stages. So you have to basically set up something like fast MCP, and then if you want to deploy it, you would then set up like a fast API layer above that. So I think it's not too much more difficult than just spinning up a normal API. If you're going to use it locally, then it's really easy as just doing something like this, but instead you pass like the URL instead of just like the command. So I think it's about as simple as doing an API.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Just an opinion then. Where do you see it going? I mean, do you think this is a, legit powerful tool that's going to basically be a great abstraction layer between agents and APIs?
Um, yes, yeah, I definitely think that's the case, but I also think maybe the power lies more in it being a marketplace for the models themselves. Like if you go to chatgpt.com, being able to install install like any tools you want rather than like agents may be built on top of that, but I think it kind of starts to transition things away from right now. Like if you want to build an agent with a bunch of custom tools, you generally are hosting that yourself. And I can see places like ChatGPT and Anthropic evolving to where all of that is kind of done. Like a lot of these no-code tools may become irrelevant because you can just do a lot of that automation on their side. At least that's what it seems like to me. It seems like running your own agent is going to be a very temporary thing.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
SWS, why use MCP instead of using API directly? I Yeah, I don't know. I think if it was still like if you use something like 11 Labs or even something like LangChain where they have tool use, the only advantage is maybe if you're not building the MCP yourself, because then the whoever you're connecting to provides the tools, they provide the descriptions of the tools, and you don't have to go through all that manual work. But I don't know. It just seems like kind of a separation of things. If you're rolling both the MCP server and whatever is consuming it, then it just seems like maybe adding a little layer of complexity, almost like a front end versus back end. So I don't know that there's a great advantage if you're like totally owning the whole thing.
Maybe scalability is an issue. Like if I have to handle, dozens of APIs, it starts to get clunky and APIs are very rigid in their endpoints. This seems like a easier way to scale that. You build it up front and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, yeah, I think if you're using tool use though, you're kind of calling an API either the only advantage of MCP is that the API then provides like the description of the tool. So it's kind of I don't know, maybe maybe that in itself is valuable, because then it's I don't know, because then it's like not separated at all. You have your API and all of the backend exists there, including the tools and their description, and then your like LangChain just connects directly to it. And if you change it on the backend, you don't have to like change in two places, I could see. But I think scalability, the AP that's going to be on the API either way. And MCP in theory is kind of like a wrapper around a traditional API or like a middle layer between a
Yeah,
traditional.
I see it as kind of an abstraction layer, right? It's another layer around it, right?
Yeah.
Just to make it easier for you to interface with multiple APIs, so you don't have to like if I got 10, I don't have to define necessarily separate calls for each one of their endpoints and requests. I can leverage MCP to kind of do that for me, potentially.
Yeah.
Definitely overkill for simple tasks or really narrowly defined tasks. And traditional API will be easier, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you're doing. I don't know, like if you're using tools at all, I don't know. I think MCP maybe is the way to go just because it's probably going to get more sophisticated and it pushes that work straight all to the API and then you can literally just connect to it. So I think it's probably the way to go even if it adds like a little bit more work, but even here you see like this isn't much more like this is about as simple as spinning up an Express server or something like that. So I don't think
No, this is pretty simple.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think in the low end, it doesn't add too much complexity. Now, I don't know like how complex it can get, depending on how like people who have giant production systems that are MCPs and they have like, a million users. I don't know how complex that is, but I think just in building it, it doesn't seem more complex than traditional APIs rather than one additional module to wrap it.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
There's a question in chat.
Yeah, I see it now. Okay. How do you recommend testing it if you don't have Claude Desktop on Linux? So you can use it with cursor. Now, one caveat is I ran into issues with that where I think there's like currently a bug in cursor where it wasn't working. It was refusing to use it, saying it wasn't in its system prompt. But in theory and generally when it's not in a bug, you can add MCP servers here in cursor. Uh, maybe if this will pop up. Yeah, you can add them here in cursor just like you do with Claude. Let's go settings. They have this tool and integration. See, they have GitHub and Slack, but like I have it added here as well as weather tool, and you can just like it's the same exact format and everything. So in theory, this works. Like again, it's currently broken, but I assume they'll fix that pretty quick. So when it's not broken, as long as they're added here, it has the green light, enable and disable it, and then you can test it, just like I'm doing in Claude. And in theory, I mean this is on auto, but like you can even set it to Claude if you want to. And then even like maybe just there's even the what I showed off a second ago, there's this. Now this doesn't actually test with the model, it just tests like that the MCP server works, but at least if you're just trying to say does it work, you can test it with this inspector, which works pretty nice for that.
The MCP inspector is a separate tool that you download. I
No,
actually haven't seen this before.
it actually came with well, I don't know. Well, like I just installed, like I pip installed the MCP CLI to actually run the MCP server, and it came with this MCP command. Now, when I ran it, MCP dev and then the server file, it did do like this little download itself, but it was automated. I didn't have to worry about that. Maybe yeah, no, it's actually provided by Anthropic. All right, I think we have time for probably a couple more questions if anyone has any. Yeah. And if not, that's totally cool. I'll leave it open for a couple more minutes just in case there's any. But otherwise, thanks everyone for coming and great session.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Dylan, I have
Dylan.
one question.
Go for it.
I just wanted to wait till the end because I figured this is a bit inappropriate for this setting, but I just wanted to ask you what exactly is an MCP and like the difference between it and an API and the use cases of it.
Okay. Um, so it's like it just is an API. Like it's technically it's for injecting context into a model. But it's very similar. I don't know. Like if it's very similar to the way agents typically work. It has a list of tools that map to like an API call and a description. Like let me here in this case like get the weather for a location. And then when you prompt the model, it does like maybe a two pass. The first pass is like, hey, are anything in here like should trigger these tools based on this description? If they do, under the hood, it'll like then make those requests and then come back and like do a second pass at the prompt that finally gets the answer with the results. So that's tool use. And traditionally, up until like the last maybe 6 months or so, you did that either manually or use something like LangChain, and then you would manually add like this tool, here's the API endpoint, and then here's the description. Here are the variables that I need you to extract, and here's how you extract them. So all an MCP server is that it takes that and then tries to simplify it into like a standard protocol so that like if you build that API, because you to do tools, you still have to build an API. When you build that API, you instead encapsulate those descriptions, the tools themselves inside that API, so you don't have to like build your API and then build all the descriptions inside of like something like LangChain or whatever agentic framework you use. So it just allows for calling third-party tools, third-party APIs, in this case, even like CLI commands from a model, or allows the model to delegate out to those tools instead of relying totally on its own training data.
Gotcha. So it can just kind of just skip a step that the API required.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Could you open up the screen for one of the other sets of code you have? Because I see this is a good example of a URL one.
Mhm.
What does the other one look like? Maybe this is the weather one. I think you had a few others.
So this is the other one actually isn't me, but I could probably show the code. The other one is for the file system. And
Uh,
yeah, I could probably show what they look like because that was actually provided by Claude.
I like the URL one too. It's interesting. I have a URL in my app, and it's fairly structured, but in some cases you don't get the location in a like latitude, longitude. Sometimes you don't get it in like a clear address. Sometimes just a cross street. It seems like this allows you to have some of the flexibility in what the information is provided, right?
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it seems like it has almost less flexibility than traditional tool because in that at least I would even say here I would say things like, get the location. I could say like looks like city, state, etc. And like, get this from context or follow up with a question to ask the user if they haven't provided it. Where here it really is more like maybe more intelligent, and with that I lose some control because I didn't tell it anything about like, what location should be or how to extract it. It just kind of infers that itself.
Right. So it's a little bit more flexible in the input, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's just this is open weather map. Maybe their API is just really nice. 'Cause
Okay.
I can do like Paris, France and stuff like that, and it works. Where I don't know, maybe a different API, maybe more strict, and would throw an error, unless I was like city and state. I don't know.
Uh,
Yeah. But I could post this. Here's the file system. So this is one that looks like it's in TypeScript. Yeah, so I could post this here in chat. As another, here's the other one that I was using to like read and write, and it's also in TypeScript, so it can be beneficial to look at that if you're more comfortable with that over Python. All right. But we are at time, so if there's any last minute questions, I can answer one or two more. But other than that, thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Dylan.